Where were you when you heard that Jack Kennedy had been killed?
I was a junior at the Philadelphia College of Art in Philadelphia. I was in a class, it was a composition class, and I can't remember the instructor's name, but she was a very sort of no-nonsense, down to earth. This is the way we're going to do this kind of person, but she was, at the same time, had a kind of really interesting aesthetic intensity, which was totally appreciable.
So this instructor told you, what did she say?
Well, the word just spread like wildfire. I mean, it took probably an hour after the event, after he actually died, for everybody to know. Even in this class, there was a buzz. And again, she was so intense about the subject, she refused to release us from class, and so we finished the other 2 hours of the class, which was fine with me. But I just found it kind of interesting, where everybody else was out in the streets, sort of publicly displaying their grief. We just kept working, talking about compositional issues and how they function on a two-dimensional or even a dimensional surface.
Meanwhile, the President of the United States had been shot down and killed.
Yeah, that's what happened. It was November 22nd. It was sort of unbelievable. I mean, it was definitely stunning. And also, 3 days later or 2 days later, I was watching live when Jack Ruby killed Lee Harvey Oswald.
Right.
And right there on live TV, there it was,
Yeah.
Jack just sort of jumps right in front of everybody and shoots him dead. I said to myself, well, could this happen anywhere else but Texas? I don't know. It's an interesting question. Oswald was sort of being led out of, from wherever he was to where he was going, by a few people who were wearing 10-gallon hats,
right.
Sort of a giveaway. Basically, it happened not because Jack Ruby was there with a gun. It happened because they didn't know how to deal with this, obviously, so that Jack Ruby could get that close and just walk right up and shoot him.
No security in the
No
basement
security.
Of the
They didn't
Dallas
understand. Maybe they didn't understand the gravity. This is this Yahoo that just shot a president that we're essentially not that crazy about anyway. It was interesting. There was a kind of standstill that happened. I mean, sort of like a standstill, a cultural standstill, in Philadelphia, which is a good-sized city. It came to a standstill for about 2 or 3 days before the engines got cranked up, and it just sort of became business as usual. Yeah, it reminded me of a poem Robert Frost called "Out, Out," and it's a very sad. I mean, almost enough to make you cry. But it's about this young boy who was helping chop up some firewood, and he was working with a saw. Robert Frost sort of develops the scene so you can sense it, and then the boy gets distracted, and he cuts his hand off. He holds the hand up. He grabs his hand. He's holding it up because he doesn't really understand what had just happened, and then he sort of collapsed. And they called the doctor, and the boy was concerned that the doctor would cut his hand off, but it was already off. And then everybody watched as he sort of breathed slowly and slower, and then finally the boy died. And like the last line, and I'm just going to paraphrase, everybody went back to their business because they were the ones not dead. They were not dead, so everything just goes back to normal. It was like you were saying about, it only takes a few months before, once you die, everyone forgets. Mm-hmm. So.
How did the killing of the president change the country? There were other presidential assassinations. There was Lincoln, there was McKinley, there was Garfield. They were American presidents who were shot down by crazy killers. We experienced this, and it's still strong in your memory.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, there were a few things that happened. Well, first of all, the second half of the 20th century was totally in a culture in transition. The culture before, let's say 1949 was a totally different culture than happened right after. I mean, during, actually it started, but, Kennedy's assassination was sort of one of those bookmarks that separated. And yeah, something happened to the American psyche. And, the presidency, just the office of the presidency and everything else has just been up in flux. It's just so interesting when you think about, after Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson became president, and when he ran as an incumbent, it looked so bad, he just withdrew and said, if nominated, I won't run. If elected, I won't serve. And then we had Nixon, who was president until he was sort of forced to resign, and that was kind of interesting. Then we had Gerald Ford as president, and he couldn't win as an incumbent, and he was maybe the only president in the history of the United States who never won a national election. That was kind of an interesting situation. And then he was replaced by Jimmy Carter, who everybody thought he was just too soft and wishy-washy to be president. That gave us Ronald Reagan, the movie star, who ran 2 successful terms, even though everybody knew he was suffering from Alzheimer's. And then he was replaced, I believe, by the first George Bush, who couldn't win as an incumbent. And then he was replaced by Bill Clinton, who was impeached for being a naughty boy, which is sort of unusual. Then George Bush was elected president, even though Al Gore, won the majority vote, and it was a very questionable election. They were talking about it at the last hearing. He so graciously sort of walked away from the election, even though it was truly questionable. He did not agree with the Supreme Court decision, but he realized that it would be too much of a negative impact. It would cause turmoil in the culture. And so he, in December, I guess, sort of congratulated George W. Bush for becoming president. Yeah, the first African American to serve, first of all, I just thought that was an impossibility, that the American electorate would vote for an elector. But it's just unbelievable. He sold hope. There it was, 2007, and he sold hope, and he convinced enough people to buy into his notion of hope and empathy that he was elected. But it didn't take but a month for, I guess, the Mitch McConnell crew to put him in his place, and basically say that the only responsibility of all Republicans is to make Obama a one-term president, which he failed at. But I knew we were in trouble. When Trump was elected, I can't say that I was terribly surprised, because one of the clues was I was at the Home Depot, and in the parking lot I saw a vehicle with a bumper sticker. Unbelievably enough, it was just stunning. And this was like during his first term, who said, don't blame me, I voted for the white guy. And I said, oh my God, this is not going to end well, and it didn't, because then we are dealing with Donald Trump, and now the hearings, which is just, when you listen to them talk, and I have to assume there's some truth in everything they say. It's not spin or taken out of context or sort of inflated in terms of its content. It's just unbelievable what happened. If all the things that they say, or some of the things, or most of the things that they say are true without spin or without distortion or without any fabrication or hyperbole, if what they're saying is true, it's just absolutely stunning. Just this morning, I went on YouTube and watched like the last half hour of that last hearing, the 9th hearing. And the 3 closing speeches of the 2 inquisitors and the chair were, for me, so moving. It almost brought me to tears, when it was said that, this guy took advantage of the zealous enthusiasm of his followers, took advantage of them. You know, I don't know, it just made me sad. So yeah, I was going back, like since the Kennedy assassination, it's like there's this ongoing problem, this ongoing dissatisfaction. And I mentioned before, like in 1971 was the first time pollsters thought to ask the question, is the country moving in the wrong direction? And except for 2 short periods, one during Reagan and one during Bill Clinton presidencies, all that time, the whole country thought we were moving in the wrong direction. Anywhere from 60 to, I think today now, it's about 80% of the American people think that the country is, well, it occurred to me, well, you know, maybe there isn't a right direction. If so many people can be so dissatisfied and so concerned about moving in the wrong direction, what do they think is the right direction? What constitutes the right direction? And, you know, I don't know. I think a right direction would involve what our founding fathers, you know, back when they wrote the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution, the whole experiment depends on trust and good faith. And if those two things have diminished, if nobody trusts anybody, and if there's no good faith because everybody's afraid someone else is trying to take advantage of them or do whatever, disenfranchise them, it's like what we've always had, what we always thought we had, we don't have anymore, you know. We have just been through too much, you know. The assassination, the 3 assassinations. You know, when Kennedy was assassinated, I was stunned. And when Martin Luther was assassinated, goodness, I thought, I mean, this, for some reason, although, you know, people sort of question the goodness of Bobby Kennedy when he was assassinated, it was breathless. I mean, I just said, God, 3 assassinations, and you know, in
And
6
Medgar
years.
Evers, and Malcolm X.
I know it goes on, and it goes on and on. Well, anyway, you know, and then of course Vietnam and all of that. I mean, that was such an incredible experience. I mentioned before, I was teaching at Ohio State when the riots happened in 1970, which, by the way, just preceded, is the country going in the right direction for the first time. And then, of course, starting a war. We had never done that before. You know, we just went and decided to impress the Iraqis with shock and awe. And that day that happened, I was just said, "Oh my God, this is." You know, it had been decades since we have had a hostility. And what was so interesting about, one of the things that was so interesting about that is, like, within 2 weeks or so after that, I had to go to New York City to pick up some art from a gallery. And so I was down in Soho on, what is it, West Broadway? Or East, I don't remember. But anyway, the fear, was palpable. I mean, everybody was expecting an event of retaliation within, you know, within earshot. I mean, you could just feel it. And then I went into an exhibition. It was Barbara, oh God, names. Well, anyway, it was at the Solly Holloman Gallery, and she had all of these she dealt with words, and she had all of these signs about the corruption of power and so on and so forth. It was just so coincidental, but after seeing that show and after being in that environment of palpable fear, I couldn't get out of the city fast enough. You know, I got what I needed from the gallery, and off I was probably only in the city for an hour, and then I was done. It was just, in lots of ways, starting a war, and for some reason that war sort of bothered me. I mean, it felt different than even the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War, it took a while before everybody realized it was a hideous mistake. But it took no time at all to realize that, boy, we have just screwed up big time. And so, yeah, all of these things, you put them all together, like a cake, you mix them all together, and you end up with a very ugly pastry of mistrust and no goodwill or anything else. And it I don't know. I don't know how you fix that. I don't know how you trust is a weird thing. It's like Humpty Dumpty. Once you break trust, it's virtually impossible to put it back together. It's impossible to put it back together. They keep talking about in the entire history of the United States, the entire history, 2 centuries plus, peaceful transition has been sort of the earmark of the beauty of our democracy. And that is no longer the fact. I mean, it's like it happens once, and you can never again say, this has never happened. It is the earmark of our democracy. It's the magic of the great experiment. And, no matter how this thing plays out, no matter who gets punished, no matter what retribution happens, if any, you can't undo that. It's like a broken trust. You can't put Humpty Dumpty back together. So maybe you can. I mean, maybe there's a way. Maybe there's a way. I have a theory about, you have so many things, because the disenfranchisement, the inequitable distribution of wealth, the political turmoil, the polarization of the electorate. But, if you put all of those, they're all like something. I think the main thing, the top of that is survival. Nobody knows how to function so that we can sort of feel like survival is a guarantee, like we've always thought. I'm talking about the sixth extinction, that's what they call it. The difference between, the right and the left politically is that the right, they're basically doing the same thing. They're just sort of doing it in 2 different ways. The right thinks what they want is a government that will do the least harm, which is an admirable thing. And the left wants to have a government that will do the most good. Well, the 2 things do not have to be mutually exclusive. There's no reason why somehow they can't meet in the middle. There is a middle. There is a place where those 2 things, they do coexist. It's like, one side of the coin's head and the other side is tails. They're one coin. Doing the least harm and doing the most good is not necessarily a conflict, but it is. It's polar in a stupid way. It has polarized the electorate.